everybody. Thank you for joining our OneSpot podcast. I want to thank Michelle particularly for joining me today. Michelle, before we get into your background, I'm curious why you picked the topic of eligibility and benefits verification. I'm not sure that would have been the first thing that came to my mind on a really interesting topic, but I was really happy to hear that you selected it.
Absolutely. You know, this topic is such an important component. And when we're working with established practices, cold start practices, really it's that first component to we have gathered the data, the information we need, and now we're checking eligibility and benefits so that we can best service our patients when they come into the practice, while also kind of maximizing what it is that we're collecting up front. So a lot of struggles that we find with practices is in their accounts receivables, and we can certainly dive right into that topic, but we've got to start with eligibility and benefits first, right? We have to know what is the copay, the coinsurance. We have to know, is that patient eligible, and can we, or what should we collect when the patient's there in our practice?
I think that's so interesting. So obviously billing is not the area that I have the most expertise, but I've spent a lot of time trying to fix problems with teams. And you see a lot of people like at the end saying, oh, how do we do better with this? And very often people forget about the upstream stuff in almost anything that's done in business. There's so many steps that need to be laid out for it to work well. And it's really, really hard if you're just focused on the downstream effects of it. So that is why it is a great topic. And I appreciate you bringing up the idea. So I know the expertise that you have, and I have been fortunate enough that I sat in on one of your courses in person. But for the people who don't know your background, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your role with the Acquios advisors and then how you got there.
Absolutely. Happy to. I have now been with Acquios Advisors for the past 2 years. I've been advising in optometry, helping independent eye care providers with everything from billing to practice management, team building, training, onboarding, hiring, all of those things as well over the last 4 or 5 years now. I've actually been in the industry and started in retail optometry as I was going to college, to school, to a university to get my degree in advertising. So it's kind of interesting how I've wound up in optometry, but that's where it all kind of started. Once I graduated, I actually had the opportunity to work with a very well-known practice in Warrensburg, Missouri, 3 doctor, 3 locations, 25 female employees, 3 male providers, doctors, all different personalities. And that's really where the most of my experience kind of stems from. I worked with that practice for probably 8 years, cross-trained within the practice. So didn't start in insurance and billing when I started with that practice. I actually started as a tech, right? Pre-testing patients as they came in for their eye exam, worked and learned the optician side of things, and also front desk, the scheduling the appointments, the obtaining that patient information that we need to be able to, again, kind of move through that entire revenue cycle management process. So that's really where a lot of my experience comes in. That practice was a highly medical scope practice. We only accepted one vision plan, but, right, in most cases, what you're checking for one vision plan or one health insurance, you're looking for that same information from the other plans. It's just finding and navigating through the details.
Same thing, just in duplication number of times. Yeah, perfect. So I know being the guru there, you probably get asked a ton of questions, and people, I can say just from my experiences talking to billers, when they're looking at our software, they're always like, well, when they ask a question, they get a little bit nervous, like, well, this is a dumb question. And one of the things that I've seen is most billers have to learn as they go. They have to teach themselves. Either it's generational knowledge that somebody else in the practice gave them, or, they're figuring it out on their own. So there's obviously no shame when they don't have things figured out, when they're building their own process. But do you have like any examples of the kinds of questions you get or things you've seen in a practice that may not be the most efficient? Obviously not like picking on anybody
Sure.
because they're figuring it out on their own, but any examples of things that you'd like to share on just kind of some of the maybe missteps that you're seeing in
Yeah.
practices?
I myself have to remind myself not everybody is at the same level, right? That's why they're looking for advice. That's why they're looking for the insight. We had an individual reach out that I was speaking with earlier today who come to find out their biller, they're still billing every plan, every exam individually, including those health insurances. So it's like the re-entering of the details from the paper to the, practice management software, and then in whatever manner they are actually filing the claim rather than utilizing a clearinghouse. And it was kind of funny. We were talking about insurance manual, and we were looking at, does she have the information kind of laid out for her? And of course she holds up her paper with sticky notes, not just handwritten, but we've got the sticky notes there, and I've been there. Right? If we don't establish those practices, those processes in the first place on the front end, it's going to remain the same. And so that's when we are going to make that introduction because, perfect example of how to get, where are my logins? What plans do I accept? You have to understand that to then be able to follow through on that topic of eligibility and benefits.
Yeah. So if you were talking to a practice, what kind of tips would you give them, or what would you say is the most efficient way for you to? I know, I hear from people all the time. If you have bad data to start, you're not going to get things approved. So do you have like a workflow that you recommend?
Every practice is going to be a little bit different. It's okay to find what is going to work best for you. I think the most important component is outlining it once you have it figured out so that your team member can then also know what that process looks like. Should anything happen, or you need to go on vacation, the practice still has to run. When it comes to like the eligibility and billing component, checking those benefits, we want to ensure we're checking benefits, at least a week in advance, really, so that we have the ability to reach out to the patient should they not be available, or eligible for that exam. We want to make sure that we aren't, or that we are preventing any gaps in our schedule, So patients calling in to schedule, we're obtaining health insurance, vision plan information on the front end. Who is the patient? Who is the insured? We're documenting the details accordingly. If we can utilize our patient communication software to get a copy of that card, so we have that on file. And then for your team, understanding, okay, now where do I go to actually check those benefits?
So where they go to check, do people typically go to each individual portal or?
Yeah, I think that definitely varies by state. Some of your plans in some states actually require that you go to Availity to check benefits. There are some other clients, other practices that are utilizing systems that can actually pull that eligibility right back into their software. Any solution is better than no solution and not checking those benefits. I often tell those in that attend my workshop that I actually preferred going to each individual website because I knew exactly how to read the benefits from United Healthcare. I knew exactly where and what I was looking for through Medicare. But we did have eventually that eligibility function that pulled it right in. And again, you're saving time on the front end, ensuring, of course, that any solution is providing an accurate solution. You're getting the information that you need to be able to collect when the patient's there.
I love I think some of the greatest advice, sometimes you go, oh, well, that makes sense. Like, it's not always like earth shattering, but the thought of, at least checking a week in
Yeah.
advance so that you have time to reach out to the patient. I can even say, I know times that I've typed things in and it seems very simple. And then you get the error because you're like, no, it's a 13 digit number and you only have entered 12 numbers.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
having that card and then making sure you have time to get accurate information. Today's episode is brought to you by OneSpot Billing Software. When a single doctor practice lost their part-time biller, AR quickly climbed past 25%. Taking billing into their own hands, the doctor turned to OneSpot and within months brought their AR down to just 5%. OneSpot gives practices the clarity and control they need to collect what they're owed. Visit onespotbilling.com/offer25 to book a demo and receive a $25 Amazon gift card. Any other tips that you have on process or things that you cover in your workshop that will help people make sure that they get their eligibility and verification?
Yeah. Just do it. We have to understand the reason as to why your team has to understand the reason as to why you want them to get that information. And once they understand the why, then it's figuring out the how. And so looking at resources that are available to help streamline, help train, help to provide them with some additional guidance. There are YouTube videos. There are, resources out there that are not, expensive or don't cost a lot of money, but you do have to take the time, make the time, and allow time for your team to be able to accomplish it at the same time. I think anytime we run into a resistance of someone not wanting to check that benefits is they don't know why. They don't understand what is the purpose, right? They don't know where to go. They don't have the roadmap of how to find that information. Or they just don't want to take the time to do it.
Yeah.
And that one's unfortunate, right? Because as a business owner, if you set an expectation and say, okay, but this is something that needs to be done, you have to have someone on your team who's willing to figure it out and use those resources.
Yeah. So I had a little bit of a debate with somebody last week at a meeting, a doctor who I was saying, and I hadn't been speaking to one of their billers, but I was saying, if the people in charge of this don't understand how important it is and you're not carving out time, like dedicating time for them, like that starts with you because I will be doing demos for people and they'll say somebody poked their head. Like I'm supposed to just be focusing on, eligibility today, or I'm just supposed to be focusing on my EOBs today. And 3 times people poked their heads in the office, like, can you run an OCT for me? Or which is fine. Like I get most people, but if the people in charge of the practice don't make it a priority and carve out the time for the team. So I'm going to ask you, because I do know why it's important, but you said, to make sure you do it, that they do understand why it's important. So let's assume that there's somebody that just doesn't know, like, why is it important that they pull the eligibility and the benefits in advance?
I think one of the constraints is from a timing aspect. And when we're checking those benefits ahead of time and able to collect from the patient when they're in the practice, we may not necessarily be saving time, but we're improving the cash flow by collecting those dollars the day that the patient's there, right? 9 times out of 10 more likely to actually collect those copays, deductibles, than having to, which some clients do, some don't, utilize a collections agency on the back end of things trying to collect it. Right? So we're improving cash flow, not necessarily saving time, but saving time from the back end and saving money from those additional collection efforts that take place.
Yeah, I would think a patient that thought they were eligible, if they came in and they had their exam and then they found that they had to pay for it, maybe 30 or 60 days later after it's been rejected or denied, and then, you chased the payer for it, they're probably not thrilled getting that message from you. Yeah.
And so that's even a great point, right? That patient experience component you have more of that understanding and you're able to educate them more so while they're there in your practice rather than through email or text or trying to figure it out after the fact. You're improving that patient experience.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that everybody forgets is how knowledgeable we are in our world. And this is very foreign to most patients. They don't understand the depths of
Absolutely.
it or why. Yeah. All right. So do you have any final tips? Otherwise, I do want to make sure that you get a chance to talk about your course and some of the things that the Acquios advisors offer, because I do think it's important that people know, even though you mentioned great resources on the web and stuff, you guys do have a whole plethora of tools that you help practices with as well. So if you have any other tips or if you want to give us some information on those tools that you guys provide.
Utilize all of the resources, of course. There is that component of understanding what resources are going to be valid. I would say some of the things that we see on some of the billing forums or Facebook optometry forums that come through, we've got to be careful about, and we want to fact check what is going to work, what is proper billing practices. I know there are several other great vendors that have some have some exceptional resources as well. As a part of some of the workshops we host, I'm currently hosting an insurance and billing. It's our hybrid virtual edition of the workshop. So we do still have the in-person part of that workshop coming up in July, which is phenomenal. I know that's one that you had the opportunity to join us for in the past, and it gives us the opportunity to work even a little bit more one-on-one, working through some different claims challenges, looking at VSP quarterly reports, helping team to understand how are we profitable with VSP and other vision plans and what are we looking for in that respect. We also are hosting Empowerment 26 in April of next year. So we've got that scheduled. Tons of great speakers, vendors that will be at that event as well. And then always recommend joining us on our website at acquios.com for other events and upcoming workshops. We also have a podcast, Thrive with Confidence, and lots of great resources through Webinar Library and World of Optics training as well.
And I can say, because I sat in on that course, I didn't get to stay for the whole time because I had something to leave, but it is, it's a very comfortable environment for different stages of knowledge too, right? Like you do cover everything, but at least that's one of the things that I noticed in the classes. We had people that had been doing billing for 8 years. And then we had a couple of people that had just started out. So I think it's nice. Like I said, sometimes the obvious stuff, you like it, just going through it from start to finish, I think is just super helpful. So
Absolutely. It is. And it is definitely a little bit of review of the basics. But even with that, there are going to be some components that even your established billers weren't necessarily aware of.
Yeah.
But definitely look and see what resources we have available. OneSpot Billing, one that is definitely an opportunity for creating transparency as well. I think that's a component where we want more clients in that software.
I just can't thank you enough for joining me, Michelle.
I've loved it. Thank you for having me, Cindy.